Infiniti has not outsold Lexus in the United States in over a decade. Not once. That's not an opinion. That's a decade of sales data that most people in this industry have quietly accepted as the permanent order of things. So when Infiniti pulls the wraps off the 2027 QX60 and calls it a direct answer to the RX and NBX, you have every right to be skeptical. I was. And then I spent time with what they've actually built here, and I'll be honest, my skepticism didn't disappear, but it got a lot more complicated. Here's what's actually at stake for you as an enthusiast. If Infiniti gets this right, genuinely right, not just press release right, it means the second-tier luxury segment just became a real conversation again. It means the money you might spend in this space deserves a harder look. But there's a detail buried in the engineering brief that changes how you read everything else about this vehicle. We'll get there. And when we do, it's going to reframe the whole picture. From the front, the 2027 QX60 opens with what Infiniti calls their double-arch grille evolution. But what it actually looks like, standing in front of it, is something closer to controlled aggression. The grille is wider than the outgoing model, flanked by blade-shaped LED headlights that cut horizontally across the fascia with a precision that the previous generation honestly never had. The hood is sculpted with a crease that runs from the grille surround back toward the windshield, a surfacing choice that catches light differently depending on the angle, which is exactly the kind of detail you notice on a second or third look, not the first. Now, personally, I think this is the strongest front-end Infiniti has designed since the original FX45. There's a sense of mass here that feels earned rather than inflated. It doesn't try to look like a German SUV, and it doesn't try to look Japanese in the way Lexus leans into spindle grills. It occupies its own visual language, which, for a brand that has spent years caught between identities, is more meaningful than it sounds. The changes are subtler, but architecturally more interesting. The taillights connect across the full width of the tailgate with a light bar that mirrors the horizontal emphasis up front, a cohesive design language that the outgoing QX60 never quite achieved. The lower bumper has been reworked to eliminate what was a somewhat forgettable valance and replace it with a structured diffuser-style trim that adds visual weight where the previous model felt hollow. Here's where I have a problem, though. The roofline still compromises third-row headroom in a way that becomes visible the moment you see the vehicle in profile. That gentle slope toward the rear looks elegant in photographs, but it's a design choice with real ergonomic consequences that we'll come back to. Step inside, and the cabin smell alone tells you something has changed, not the synthetic newness of budget plastic off-gassing. This is the kind of leather and wood smell that used to signal arrival, the kind you remember from the first time you sat in a car that cost more than your first apartment. Infiniti has sourced semi-aniline leather for the first time in this segment position, and it raids in your hands before your eyes even register what you're looking at. The overall impression is one of horizontal layering, surfaces that stretch across the cabin rather than stacking vertically, which makes the interior feel wider than its measurements suggest. The dashboard architecture centers on a 14.3-inch infotainment display paired with a 10.8-inch digital cluster, both housed in a continuous curved glass panel that floats above the instrument panel rather than being embedded in it. The integration is clean. Infiniti has also reduced physical button count by roughly 40% compared to the outgoing model, which is either progress or a concession to trend depending on your position on haptic controls in a moving vehicle. If you ask me, there are still too many functions buried in the touchscreen that belong on a dedicated switch, specifically climate zone control, which should never require a submenu at highway speed. The front seats have been redesigned with lumbar articulation that adjusts in 4 directions, an upgrade that will matter on drives longer than 2 hours, which is exactly the kind of driving this vehicle's buyer actually does. Second row space is genuinely generous, with 39.4 inches of legroom that competes directly with the Lexus RX 350 liters. The third row, as the roofline predicted, extracts a compromise. 33.1 inches of headroom for adults who are under 5 feet 10 inches or not planning to stay long. Now here's the detail Infiniti buried. The 2027 QX60 launches with a 2.0-liter turbocharged 4-cylinder as the base powertrain. 268 horsepower, standard all-wheel drive. That number sounds adequate until you consider that the Acura MDX starts with 272 horsepower from a 3.5-liter V6. The cubic inches are gone. The sound that made these vehicles memorable, the kind of effortless pull that didn't announce itself until you needed it, has been traded for a turbo note that is competent and entirely forgettable. This is the identity question at the center of this vehicle. Infiniti built its reputation on engines that felt alive. The VQ series engines are in the fraternity of great power plants. This replacement isn't bad, but it isn't that either. What the 2027 QX60 ultimately represents is a brand trying to close a gap that is partly mechanical, partly perceptual, and partly a question of whether anyone under 55 still knows Infiniti exists. They've made a genuinely better vehicle than the one it replaces. The design is cohesive. The interior is the best they've ever built in this segment. But the engine decision will cost them credibility with exactly the buyers who remember what Infiniti used to sound like. Whether that trade was worth it, that's the question worth sitting with. Drop your answer in the comments. And if you want to see how the QX60 stacks up against the MDX in a direct comparison, that video is coming sooner than you might expect. Now, if you've been in the automotive hobby or enthusiast space for decades, you probably remember when Infiniti first came onto the scene back in 1989. It was Nissan's answer to what Lexus was doing for Toyota. Both of these Japanese luxury brands launched the same year, and from the very beginning, they were competing for the same customer. That rivalry is nearly as old as some of the grandchildren of the people watching this right now, and over the decades, that competition has had its ups and downs. There were periods where Infiniti was genuinely exciting, genuinely competitive, and then there were longer stretches where it kind of lost its way and Lexus just dominated the conversation so thoroughly that Infiniti almost became an afterthought in certain circles. But here's what I find fascinating about where we are right now. Infiniti is not just trying to compete with Lexus anymore. They're going after Acura too, and they're doing it at a moment when both of those brands are going through significant transitions of their own. And the QX60 is the vehicle at the center of this entire strategic push. Let me explain why this matters so much, because I don't think you can fully appreciate what's happening with the 2027 model unless you understand the history and the competitive landscape it's being born into. The QX60 has always been Infiniti's bread and butter in the American market. When you look at sales data, this three-row luxury SUV has consistently been Infiniti's volume leader in the United States. And the United States, particularly the older demographic of American luxury car buyers, is absolutely the core market that Infiniti is targeting here. So when they invest heavily in a new generation of the QX60, that's not just product development, that's a statement about where the brand sees its future. That's them planting a flag and saying this is who we are, and this is who we're competing against. Now let me give you my honest personal take on Infiniti's situation, because I think it's important context. For about a decade, maybe longer, Infiniti was coasting. And I say that respectfully because there are a lot of reasons why automakers coast sometimes. Platform sharing with parent companies, budget constraints, shifting corporate priorities. But the result for Infiniti was a lineup that felt like it wasn't quite sure what it wanted to be. Were they sporty? Were they premium comfort-focused? Were they technology leaders? The messaging was muddled, and the products reflected that. The QX60 specifically, while a solid, capable vehicle, wasn't doing anything that made you stop and think. It wasn't doing anything that made you choose it over a Lexus RX 350L or an Acura MDX for reasons beyond price. And that's a problem when you're a luxury brand, because luxury purchases are almost never purely rational decisions. What luxury car buyers, especially buyers who have been in this market for 30 or 40 years, what they want is to feel like they made the smart choice, the choice that reflects their taste, their experience, their discernment. They want to look at that vehicle in their driveway and feel something, and Infiniti had lost some of that ability to generate that feeling. So what's changed with the 2027 QX60? Let me start with the powertrain situation, because this is where I think Infiniti is making some genuinely smart decisions. The brand has been working on their electrification strategy for several years now, and with the 2027 QX60, we're seeing the results of that effort in a way that I think is more thoughtful than what a lot of competitors have done. Rather than rushing into a fully electric platform before the infrastructure and the customer base is fully ready, Infiniti is taking a hybrid and plug-in hybrid approach that I think is actually well suited to their target customer. Think about who buys these vehicles. We're talking about buyers who are largely in their mid-50s to mid-70s. Buyers who have been purchasing luxury vehicles for decades. Buyers who live primarily in the United States, many of them in suburban or semi-rural areas where a fully electric vehicle still presents real practical challenges. These are not customers who want to be early adopters of unproven technology. These are customers who want refinement, reliability, and the kind of quiet, effortless power delivery that makes a luxury vehicle feel special, and a well-executed hybrid system delivers exactly that. The new powertrain options in the 2027 QX60 are centered around a turbocharged V6 base, with a plug-in hybrid variant that Infiniti is positioning as their technology flagship in this segment. And here's what I think is smart about this approach. The plug-in hybrid doesn't ask the customer to change their lifestyle completely. You still have the range and flexibility of a conventional powertrain for long trips or when you can't charge. But for daily use, the majority of your driving can be done on electric power, which means smooth, silent, immediate torque that actually makes the driving experience feel more premium, not less. That's not a compromise, that's an upgrade. And I think Infiniti has finally figured out how to frame that story correctly to their customer base. Compare this to what Lexus has been doing. Lexus has been on a hybrid mission for longer than almost anyone in the luxury space. They have tremendous credibility with buyers who want dependable, refined hybrid technology. The RX 450 and the RX 450 Hull have been strong sellers for them precisely because of that credibility. So for Infiniti to compete in this space, they can't just offer a hybrid. They have to offer a hybrid that is demonstrably better in some meaningful way, or they have to offer it in a package that addresses the specific weaknesses of the Lexus offering. And that's exactly what I think they're attempting to do with the 2027 QX60. The Lexus RX in three-row form, the RX 350L, has always been criticized for having a somewhat cramped third row. It's a compromise that Lexus made in order to keep the vehicle's proportions elegant, but it means that the third row is really only suitable for children or for very short adults in a pinch. The QX60 has historically offered a more usable third row, and from everything I'm hearing about the 2027 model, Infiniti has doubled down on that advantage rather than compromising it. For a family vehicle that also needs to function as a luxury vehicle, that practicality difference can be the deciding factor, especially for buyers who are in their 50s and 60s and might be carrying grandchildren or adult children or friends on road trips. Now let's talk about Acura, because I think the Acura NBX comparison is actually the more interesting competitive battle here. The NDX has been one of Honda's greatest success stories. It's consistently been one of the best-selling luxury three-row SUVs in America, and the current generation, which launched for 2022, is genuinely impressive. Acura went back to basics with that vehicle. They focused on driving dynamics, they put real engineering effort into the chassis and the suspension, and they offered an SHAWB system that is genuinely excellent. The NBX Type S in particular is a vehicle that any serious automotive enthusiast has to respect. But here's the thing about the NBX that I think creates an opening for Infiniti. The current NBX, especially the Type S, leans pretty hard into the performance angle. It's a sporty three-row luxury SUV, and for a certain buyer, that's exactly right. But there's another buyer, and I'd argue a slightly older, slightly more comfort-focused buyer, who doesn't need their three-row family SUV to feel like a sports car. What they need is for it to feel like a first-class cabin. They want isolation from road noise. They want seats that feel like furniture. They want technology that is intuitive enough that they don't need to read a manual to use it. They want to arrive at their destination feeling relaxed, not stimulated, and that is a buyer who the current NDX, for all its excellence, is not perfectly optimized for. This is where my personal analysis comes in, and I want to be clear that this is my read on the situation based on the information available and my understanding of this market. I think Infiniti has identified a very specific gap in the luxury three-row SUV segment. It's the gap between the reliable but slightly bland comfort approach of a Lexus and the athletic, driver-focused approach of the current Acura. And the 2027 QX60 is being positioned to live in that gap, offering something that the sophisticated, experienced luxury buyer finds genuinely appealing. A vehicle that is comfortable and quiet and refined, but that also has a sense of occasion, a sense of presence that reminds you that you chose a luxury vehicle, not just a large SUV with a premium badge. Whether Infiniti can actually pull that off is another question, and I want to be honest with you about the challenges they face. Brand perception is incredibly sticky. It takes years of consistent, high-quality products to shift how buyers think about a brand, especially buyers with decades of automotive experience who have developed strong loyalties and strong opinions. Lexus spent years building their reputation, and they did it by delivering dependable, refined vehicles over and over again. Infiniti has not always had that consistency, and winning back buyers who may have been disappointed by the brand in the past is not something that happens in one model cycle. The other challenge is the dealer network. Luxury car buying is not just about the product, it's about the entire ownership experience, from the showroom to the service department. And this is an area where Lexus has a significant structural advantage. Lexus dealers consistently rank at or near the top of customer satisfaction surveys. Their service experience is often compared favorably to the vehicle itself. Infiniti has been working to improve this, but if you talk to buyers who have owned both brands, the service experience differential is still real, and it matters enormously to the kind of buyer who is making a $40,000 or $50,000 purchase decision. So my honest assessment is this: the 2027 QX60 represents the most serious competitive challenge to Lexus and Acura that Infiniti has mounted in a very long time. Maybe since the original Q45 and the early FX45 days, when Infiniti was genuinely exciting and genuinely surprising. The product itself, from everything I can gather, is substantive. The powertrain strategy is smart, the positioning is thoughtful, but Infiniti still has to execute over multiple model cycles, and they have to back it up with a dealer and ownership experience that matches the ambitions of the vehicle itself. Now I want to spend a few minutes on the technology side of things, because this is increasingly where luxury vehicles are differentiated, and it's an area where the competitive dynamics are shifting rapidly. The infotainment and driver assistance technology race in luxury vehicles has accelerated dramatically over the past 5 years, and the brands that have invested heavily in this area have seen real market share benefits. You see this clearly in how brands like Genesis have gained traction specifically by offering technology that feels current and premium at a price point that undercuts the established luxury players. Infiniti has historically been somewhat behind on technology integration. Their older vehicles had proprietary navigation systems that didn't age well, and their voice control and connectivity features lagged behind what you'd find in a comparable BMW or Mercedes. The 2027 QX60 is supposed to address this comprehensively with a new generation software platform that supports wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, over-the-air updates, and a new approach to the driver assistance suite that Infiniti is branding under their own umbrella. The driver assistance story is worth paying attention to, because this is where the age demographics of Infiniti's target market create both an opportunity and a responsibility. Features like adaptive cruise control, lane centering, automatic emergency braking, and blind spot monitoring are not luxury extras for an older buyer. They are genuinely meaningful safety features that can make a real difference in daily driving, and a brand that presents these features in a way that is intuitive, reliable, and trust-inspiring, rather than intrusive or confusing, can build real loyalty with this demographic. It's not about flashy, because flashy gets tiring. It's about dependable, because dependable builds confidence, and confidence builds loyalty. I've talked to a lot of buyers in this demographic over the years, and what I consistently hear is that they want technology that works every time, that doesn't require you to update your phone software or repair your Bluetooth every other week, that doesn't throw up error messages when you just want to back out of your driveway. The bar is not necessarily the bleeding edge. The bar is consistent, reliable performance that enhances rather than complicates the ownership experience. If Infiniti has truly addressed this with the 2027 QX60, that alone could be a significant differentiator from where they've been in the past. Let me also touch briefly on the commercial and strategic context here, because I think it's relevant to understanding what's at stake for Nissan and Infiniti as a whole. Nissan has been going through a significant period of restructuring and strategic repositioning. The company has faced real challenges over the past several years, and one of the consequences of those challenges has been some uncertainty about the future direction and investment level in the Infiniti brand. There were genuine questions at one point about whether Infiniti would survive as a standalone luxury brand or be folded back into Nissan in some form. The 2027 QX60 is in some ways a direct answer to those questions. The investment level that it represents, the engineering ambition it reflects, the competitive positioning it stakes out, all of this signals that Nissan has made a decision to keep Infiniti alive and to give it a real shot at competing in the American luxury market. That's not a small decision, and it's not a cheap one. And for buyers who have been waiting to see whether Infiniti was serious about its future, this vehicle is a meaningful signal. The American luxury SUV market, particularly the three-row segment, is not a small or niche market. We're talking about one of the most valuable and contested segments in the automotive industry. The buyers in this segment are spending real money, they're often repeat customers, and they have high expectations for the entire ownership experience. Winning in this segment doesn't just generate immediate revenue. It builds the brand equity and the customer loyalty that sustains a luxury brand over decades. This is what BMW built with the X5. This is what Lexus built with the RX. This is what Lincoln is trying to rebuild with the Aviator. And this is what Infiniti is betting on with the 2027 QX60. My final thought on this, and I want to leave you with something to consider, is this. The automotive landscape for luxury SUVs in America is going through a moment of genuine disruption right now. You have the traditional Japanese luxury players, you have the Germans, you have the American brands going through revivals of varying quality, and you have new entrants from Korea and elsewhere that are punching well above their historical weight. In this environment, the brand that wins is not necessarily the one with the most heritage or the biggest marketing budget. It's the one that understands its customer most deeply and delivers on that understanding most consistently. Infiniti's target customer for the QX60 is someone who has been buying cars for 30 or 40 years, someone who remembers when Japanese luxury first arrived and disrupted the Germans, someone who has owned a lot of vehicles and has a sophisticated, earned perspective on what makes a luxury vehicle worth the money. That customer is not going to be wowed by marketing claims. They're going to want to know if the vehicle is actually as good as it needs to be. And over the coming months, as more information becomes available and as real-world ownership begins, we'll get a much clearer picture of whether the 2027 Infiniti QX60 has delivered on its considerable promise. I think this is going to be one of the most important vehicle stories of 2027 in the luxury space, and I'm going to be watching it very closely. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below, particularly from those of you who have owned Infiniti vehicles in the past or who have been cross-shopping in this segment recently. Your real-world perspective is always more valuable than anything I can tell you from the outside looking in. And if you found this analysis useful, make sure you're subscribed because we're going to have a lot more coverage of this vehicle and this segment as the story develops. Take care, everybody, and I'll see you in the next one.